Hey friends, welcome back to the Work From Home Setter. Today I'm going to go through with you how I make my sourdough because I feel like there is just like a lot of complication of it online. A lot of people who maybe intimidate people a little bit too much to get started. And I want to just kind of show you that it can be easy, it can be simple, and it doesn't have to be this like crazy thing where we're always looking for a perfect crumb or the perfect rise or whatever it is. And not to say that those things aren't great too. I think sourdough can be really fun and scientific, and you can really nerd out on it if you really want to, if that's your thing. But if it's not, like me, where that stuff just like, if you're trying to get bread on the table for your family multiple times a week while you're still taking care of 2 kids 2 and under and working full time, then maybe this method might be good for you, and maybe some of the tips that I share might be helpful. So with that, I'm just going to show you kind of how I go through my sourdough and kind of how fuss-free it is. So this is my sourdough starter. I fed it yesterday. I'm not sure if you can see. Let's see if I can. So it is pretty bubbly in there. And so to start off, I just always pour my sourdough into the jar or into the bowl, and typically I do like 1.5 cups probably. Like I said, I don't measure. And then what I'm going to add to this is some water. I always just take water right from the sink. We used to have a reverse osmosis system, and I used to use that in our old house. We haven't gotten one here yet. I do plan on it, but we've done a well test and our water is actually pretty clean here. There's not a ton of minerals, so I don't get too concerned about it. This is kind of what it looks like. It's just like a little sourdough slurry here. And to that, I'm just gonna add in my flour. Now I'm just gonna do 1 loaf here because I already have one that I made yesterday, and so I'm not trying to make like too many at a time right now. And so I'm just gonna make 1 for this video. And I just add in the flour. And I've done this enough where I kind of have a really good eyeball on it. And so this will be pretty good for 1 loaf. And then I'm gonna add in my salts. Now you could do an auto lease, which would be mixing this up now and then adding salt and water later. Personally, for me, I just like don't remember. I'm too sidetracked with kids to remember to come back in like a reasonable amount of time to like add in the salt later, or I might just forget all together. So I just add it in all at once. Again, like you could do it a little bit later. And then I just mix it up until it starts to get to be a little bit of a more shaggy dough. I'll bring you in a little bit closer. So this is what it starts to look like. I usually just kind of mix it together until my fork kind of doesn't let me anymore. I can tell I'm gonna need to add a little bit more water in here. So I'm gonna add just a hair more, and then I'm gonna start mixing it with my hands. Okay, so I added a little bit more in there. I'm gonna mix it up again with my fork. All right, and so I usually just use 1 hand, try to only get 1 hand dirty here. And if you have any rings on, don't forget to take them off at this point, because trying to get sourdough out of your rings is just like the toughest, most annoying task. So don't recommend that. And so I'm just gonna kind of like knead it together until I don't really see like too many dry spots of flour. And that way, as it's starting to rise, I don't get like clumps together, which is what you'll get if you don't really mix all of the flour and water together right away. All right, so this is what it looks like. I'm gonna put some saran wrap over it. I'll come back in about 15 minutes and we'll do our first stretch and fold. All right. So I'm just gonna set this aside and let it rise. I'm going to feed my sourdough starter. So one thing I do that I think other people that I've seen online don't do, and maybe I do this wrong, but I don't know, it works out for me, so it's just fine. I actually just feed the container that I had my sourdough starter like rising in, and I just kind of keep that container going. I switch it out every like 2 weeks or so it doesn't get like too funky in there or like crusty on the edges where I can't put like a cover back on there. So I just fill it up about like quarter to halfway or so, and then I put some water in. And then pro tip, I would mix it up if you don't have a lot of extra starter, like dried starter, or anything like that. If you're newer, like you're afraid you might kill your starter, or honestly, if you're like a seasoned baker, because I've made this mistake before, where I thought, oh, I will throw my starter in the oven, let it rise a little bit quicker, it'll be a little bit warmer in there. No, you're gonna forget, you're gonna turn on the oven and accidentally bake your starter, which is exactly what I did. It was a really sad day, and I made that starter from scratch. It was my own starter, so that was a little bit of a bummer. So I recommend using one of these spatulas, one of these rubber spatulas, to mix up your starter every once in a while, and you can let it dry. So I'm gonna scrape off all this excess, and you can let this dry on your counter, and once it's dried you can crackle it off, and then you can put it into a baggie, save it for later. Now if you are newer and you haven't started your sourdough yet, and you're not really sure, like, should I make my own starter, should I buy a starter? Personally, like, I kind of recommend buying a starter if you're just getting started, because it's going to allow you to kind of like jump in and start making bread right away. Whereas making a starter can take 3 to 4 weeks to get a really strong starter and something that's going to bake bread really well for you. And so I personally bought this one after I killed the one that I made. I bought it on Facebook Marketplace for like $10. To me, it was worth the time saved that I didn't have to spend weeks making my own starter again. I could get back into baking bread right away. And like for me, it worked out really well. I know you can buy dehydrated starters online. I haven't like used that before, so I don't really have anyone that I could recommend. But I do know that there's like more popular people out there that do sell it, that probably have pretty reliable ones. So certainly, you know, do your research on whatever you buy. But I think buying it local is pretty great. Most people sell you pretty good starters if you're buying it locally, and then it's already like in the started kind of like liquid form. You don't have to rehydrate it, which also takes like another week to get back started up. So just some things to consider. I think having a strong starter is really what will help you move past most mistakes that happen with sourdough. Personally, if you have like a really strong starter, I think you can get past like any other like basic mistakes that you might make, and it'll kind of like help correct a lot of those things. So that's just my opinion on it. That's what I've seen have seems to work for me, but certainly I know everyone has different experiences with it.
This is my first stretch and fold, and as you can see, it's already developed a little bit of gluten here. It allows me to pull it a little bit, but obviously the more we do the stretch and folds and the longer it sits, the more gluten is going to develop, and the stretchier it will be as a dough. So I'm just going to do it about 4 times, my stretch and fold, and as I'm pulling it up, you can see that it's getting harder the further into the stretch and folds I get. So the last 4th one I will do, and I will let it sit for another about 15-20 minutes before I do a second stretch and fold.
All right, so this is stretch and fold number 2, about another 15 minutes. And you can see that we already have a little bit more structure. I'm gonna do this one really quick because I just heard my daughter start to cry, so she's getting up from her nap. So we're gonna do this one pretty quick here. And I'm gonna let this sit for probably another 20-30 minutes, especially as I get baby girl some lunch. We'll be back. Right, so it is 6 o'clock and we just finished up dinner, so please excuse the mess because I have not cleaned it up yet, but this is starting to really proof here and I just want to make sure that it doesn't get too much before I get sidetracked with bedtime and the kids and all that stuff. So one thing to remember though, if you don't think you're going to be able to shape your bread before like it overproofs or something like that, you can just stick it in the fridge. It'll kind of put a stopper on that proofing kind of time. And so I've done that before where it's like, if I started bread at like 6 o'clock at night, and like I usually go to bed by like 9 because I'm exhausted by the time that we put the kids down. So if I leave it overnight, that's a little too long to proof, especially like if it's summertime, it gets really warm in the house. Sometimes I can get away with it in the winter if it's cool enough. However, I usually just stick it in the fridge so that I don't like ruin a thing of dough, and then I'll just bring it back out in the morning, let it finish proofing, and then shape it then. You can also, like if you're running out of the house, whatever, you don't think you'll be back in time, stick it in the fridge, make sure you're safe. So this is kind of what it looks like right now. This is kind of the spring back here, and you kind of see some of the structure here when you bring it out onto the counter. Okay. And I think the biggest thing is like just continually making dough, and like that way you'll really start to see and notice like when does it look done, because you can set timers all you want and like check temperatures and all that stuff, but really just like knowing what it looks like and what it feels like when it's ready, I think is just like the biggest thing ever. Now, I don't do anything crazy with my shaping. I know a lot of people have really cool techniques. I just kind of like roll mine up one way and then I roll it up the other. And then I just kind of like twist it around so that the bottom part kind of like comes together into a nice circle. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm really not a big proponent of like buying all of these crazy sourdough like contraptions like a Banneton. I don't personally recommend it. I haven't used them since like probably 3 years now, because they just got moldy and gross like very quickly. And other things I don't really recommend, but I really do live by my scraper, especially if you're making 2 loaves. It really helps you cut it in half, and it helps you kind of get it off of the counter without like ruining it. And like I said, I don't use Bannetons. I just use a clean cloth, and I just throw it right into the bowl that I, made my dough in, because why dirty another bowl? I'll have to clean it later. That's fine. And then I will just kind of fold it up here, and I just stick it in the fridge. I will bake this up tomorrow morning. However, you can let it sit in the fridge like up to 72 hours. That'll just like, your benefits of sourdough have already happened in your bulk fermentation on the counter. So you get a lot of those gut benefits. The benefit of leaving it in the fridge really has helped develop that sour flavor. And we'll enjoy that sour flavor, but sometimes we just need bread sooner than we can wait for it to sit in the fridge. So I'll probably bake it up tomorrow because we're gonna make some French toast in the morning, and we're probably gonna use up a lot of bread right away. So I'll just make sure that it gets baked up, and we will come back then and I'll give you guys some tips about how I bake it, how I make sure that the crust isn't burnt, and what makes a really good bread. The other thing that I wanted to show you is that this has mostly dried here. There's still some wet spots, so I'm gonna have to let it sit on the counter. But this is what I was talking about, that you can just start to like crumble it off of here, and you can throw it right into a bag. I should probably wait until I wash my hands from my wet dough, but you can just throw it right into a Ziploc bag, and that way if something ever happens to your starter, you have an extra starter to reactivate whenever you're ready. So highly recommend doing this. All right, it is the next day and I am going to set my oven at 450. That's what I bake my bread at, and I always just throw my Dutch oven into the oven and let it preheat with the oven and get nice and hot. The other tip that I highly recommend to do is to put a baking sheet underneath your Dutch oven. That way it'll make sure that it protects the bottom of the Dutch oven and it doesn't get super hot and burnt underneath. This has made a huge difference for me in making sure that I don't have burnt bread at the end of the day, which is such a bummer when you put all that work into it. So I'm going to get some parchment paper. I'm going to dump my bread onto that and we're going to score it. Okay, like I said, not a huge big proponent of getting all these fancy tools, and I really don't believe that you honestly need a scoring tool either. You can definitely get away with using a knife. However, I will say that I find that my bread bakes up just a little bit nicer when I'm able to get a deeper score using something like an actual scoring tool. I want to say this cost me no more than like $20. I got it from a small business. If I can remember where I got it quite a few years ago. I'll link it below. If not, you can find them on most places like Amazon or whatever. I have done some really fun and intricate scoring before, but if I'm just kind of baking bread for my family weekly, I just kind of do really basic scores. Here, I'll bring you in close so you can see. So I'm just kind of doing I don't know if you'd call this the grain look, but it's just kind of making V's down the middle. And then you just want to do kind of on the side here, nice and deep. And I'm going to come back and bake this. I got to go grab my daughter who just woke up from her nap. So I'm going to take the Dutch oven out and put my bread in there. It gets pretty hot, as one might expect. And then I'm gonna put it covered in here for about 35 minutes, and I will take the cover off and leave it on for 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how much I think it needs to get crispier. This is a pretty big loaf, so I'm kind of thinking it's gonna be closer to the 15 end. So we'll be back. All right, time for the moment of truth. So I let this cool for probably at least 2 hours now. It is mostly cool at this point. I cannot find my bread knife for the life of me. I brought it over to church when I made some bread for after service. I haven't seen it since, and it's not at the church, so who knows? But this is the Crumb. But honestly, let me just kind of, I don't know, I see people squeeze it. I don't really know what that means, but you can hear pretty good crunch on there too. But to me, the most important thing, rather than does the crumb look perfect, is does my family eat it? Do we like and enjoy eating it? And does it nourish us? Which it does, all three. So I hope that you've learned from this video that sourdough doesn't have to be complicated. It can be fun, and that you can truly get bread on the table for your family multiple times a week without making it be so fussy or crazy or just complicated. So if you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments below what your favorite part was, what you learned, or let me know if you have something to share with others that might help them with their sourdough journey. If you liked this video, I do put videos out every week. I would really appreciate if you shared this video or if you subscribe to stay with us longer. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.